Hey, it's Chef Evelyn, and I'm back with another video. And today I want to talk about some cookbooks that I want to add to my collection this year. So, in a recent podcast episode, if you're listening to the Eat Out at Home podcast, I was talking about some things that I want to do this year to make cooking at home more enjoyable, to make it more fun, to kind of get back to why I fell in love with food in the first place. If you've been following along with the podcast for probably the past 6 months, I talked about how I essentially stopped cooking for about 7 years and like making my way back into the kitchen for just enjoyment and not just for work. And so I decided that I was going to share okay, here's some of the things I'm going to be doing to make cooking more enjoyable. And one of those things I talked about was I was going to be doing a lot more experimenting. And sometimes as chefs, we make a lot of things, we know how to do a lot of things, but I can't remember the last time I kind of broke the rules in the kitchen or stepped outside of my current expertise. And so I used to read cookbooks all the time for fun, and I get it from my grandmother because even though my grandmother did not teach me how to cook, I wish I had that story. My grandmother was an amazing cook, and she used to sell dinners out of her home, and maybe that's where I got the entrepreneurial bug because I did start my first food business at 15. But she had a gazillion cookbooks, and she had magazines and newspaper clippings, and she had her handwritten notes in the margin where she had been modifying recipes and things like that. And when she passed away in 2000, I inherited all of that, right? And I kind of just kept the things that had her handwriting and stuff on them. And so collecting cookbooks, I'm looking at my shelf right now, was a huge thing for me for a while. And then I kind of stopped, mainly because I don't actually use cookbooks to cook. I just mainly use them for inspiration. And it's been a long time since I added some books to my collection. So I think I have about 18 books here. Some of them are not new at all. And then some of them are recent. I'm going to say in the past 5 years that I want to add to my collection. So I would love to know if you own any of these books, if you are curious about any of these books, if you have them in your collection, what you think about them, how do you use them? And you're going to notice a theme here. These are more cooking educational books than traditional cookbooks. I have a couple of traditional cookbooks by here's 150 recipes from this particular author on this subject, but the bulk of this list is just things that I kind of want to have in my collection forever, things that I want to be able to reference over and over and over again, things that have been sitting in my Amazon cart for forever. And I have put together a list of all these cookbooks and some other ones that are on my want to buy, but these are kind of probably my top 18 priority. But if you want to have access to them all in one place, I've created a little collection in the link underneath this video. So let's get into it. So the first book is The Baker's Apprentice. And when I went to culinary school, I went for both baking and pastry and then also culinary. But I will say my first love is baking. It's the thing that brings me the most joy. It brings me the most stress relief. When I started my first food business, it was a dessert business. And so I've always been drawn to baking. And so I really want to get back into it. I can do a lot of, everyday things without needing to think about it, right? I've got so many formulas and recipes memorized, but I'm really ready to get back deep into my French pastry roots, and really want to do some more elaborate, kind of more complex desserts. I really liked plated desserts, and I also like formed desserts that have multiple components. Maybe there's a sponge cake, and then there's maybe some, hazelnut paste, and then there's maybe a mousseline, and then, maybe it's all coated in a gelée. I'm really ready to get back into those types of desserts. So I think this would be helpful for me. The second book I want to grab, some of these books I've never seen in person, right? It's just reading the description online and the title of the book. So I might have to take a trip to Barnes & Noble and see if some of these books are in store so I can take a look at them before I purchase them. But the second book I want to pick up is Pulp. And this is all about cooking with fruit. And I'll have to admit, I don't cook with fruit a lot. One, I'm not a huge fan of the texture of cooked fruit. Apples and apple pie, yes. Maybe a blueberry cobbler, But when it comes to like peaches and a peach cobbler, I'm not in love with it. Cooked cherries, cooked strawberries, or whatever. And so I really want to see what this book can introduce me to, maybe change my mind, maybe my texture sensations have changed. But I really thought it was a great way to see, particularly in baking, but also in savory cooking, what are some ways that I can incorporate cooked fruit? I eat fruit all the time, whether it's just whole fruit that I'm just like slicing and eating, or peeling and eating, or I'm eating it in a smoothie. But like I said, outside of that, I may even throw it in a salad, but outside of that, I'm not really doing as much with fruit as I would like. So the next book is The Food Lab. I want to pick that up. I feel like some of these are about to be really self-explanatory. I want to pick up The Food Lab. I also want to pick up The Flavor Thesaurus and The Flavor Thesaurus More Flavors, which is the plant-based version. I also want to pick up The Art and Science of Food Pairings. So when you look at this spectrum of books, this is really like, I'm really wanting to get back into like the science of cooking, the science of baking. And if you don't know this, like if this is your first video with me, or depending on when you came to my channel, my original career is in engineering. So my 2 bachelor's degrees are in chemical and environmental engineering. So when it comes to like math and science and chemistry and physics, like I eat that stuff up. And I thought math and science equaled engineering, but I digress. That's a conversation for a different day. Okay. But I think that's what drew me to baking, but also wanting to get into like, obviously we all know about like the Maillard reaction, or baking soda and baking powder and cream of tartar and all these different things when it comes to baking, and, what acid does and denaturing the proteins and all that. But I kind of want to, go further than that. Obviously, I understand about like all the different forms of heat transfer when it comes to cooking, conduction, convection, all of that kind of stuff. And I had to learn that in engineering, but I really want to go even further. And specifically, I want to get into like the flavor pairings, right? So with that, I also want to add to my book collection the Flavor Equation and the Flavor Matrix, the cultures of and flavors, and also the Science of Spice. And let me tell you why the Science of Spice really, really intrigues me, because when it comes to spices, you have like water soluble compounds in certain spices, and then you have oil soluble compounds in certain spices. And depending on whether you put them in an acid or you apply heat to them, right, you're going to get a different flavor profile. It's kind of like when you think about certain cultures from around the equator, whether you're talking about the Caribbean, whether you're talking about Indian cuisines, where they bloom the spices, or in some cultures they call it burn the spices, where instead of adding the spices once the liquid is already in the food, you cook the spices in the oil. Y'all know what I'm talking about. You cook. So, but I really want to get more into that so that I can and I know that instinctively. So like sometimes it's like if I want to bring out a certain flavor profile, I'll bloom the spices first, or I'll, let them sit in a little acid, things like that. But I really want to know why am I doing that? Like, what is the chemical reaction or chemical reactions that are happening? What else can I do with, spices? Obviously, fresh grind them, right? Toast them and then grind them. But I want to know more, dry toasting. Like if you put some cardamom pods and a cinnamon stick and, anise in a pan and toast it, and then you make your beverage, it's going to be a much different flavor experience than if you just went straight and ground those up. So really want to get into that. I kind of jumped over the flavor equation, the flavor matrix, cultures and flavors. I love world cuisine. Okay. And right now I'm really in my equatorial food life, where foods from around the equator, like countries and cultures around the equator, is what I'm really drawn to. And then foods kind of south of that, right? So if, let's, talking about Latin America, the Caribbean, Southern Asia, India, parts of, Africa, South America, those are the cuisines that I'm being drawn to right now. So when you start talking about cultures and flavors, I feel like in culinary school, European flavors are considered the standard, right? You learn about mother sauces, and you spend a lot of time on French cuisine, a lot of time on, German, Italian, even Spanish cuisine. But I really want to get into the cuisine of, like, West Africa versus East Africa versus North Africa versus South Africa versus, South America. What's the difference between South American cuisine, Caribbean cuisine, and Latin American cuisine? What are the similarities, right? Why are there 50,000 versions of curry? Why is there paella, but also pilau, but also jollof, but also jambalaya, but also Mexican red rice, right? And really want to get into that. I don't necessarily want to get into the history of that, right? Because colonization, but but I do want to get into, like, the similarities and the flavor profiles and the differences and the nuances. What's the difference between Ghanaian jollof, Kenyan pilau, and Nigerian jollof, right? Like, I want to get into what are some of the similarities and the differences. So then continuing on, and this again just rounds my point out, the global pantry cookbook. So I feel like right now we have more access to ingredients from around the world than ever before, and I love that for us. I love that for me particularly. I've always been drawn to, like, interesting ingredients, and I have found myself, like, seeing more things that I'm like, oh, I've never heard of that, or I've never tried that. And so I really want to, like, up my game back up when it comes to knowing what different sauces or spices or blends or paste or different ingredients from around the world, right? Like, I grew up in the Midwest, and I live in the continental United States. So, for example, I was watching something the other day, and of course I've heard of guava. Of course I've heard of guava. I've tasted guava, all that, love it. But a woman was making a dessert with guava paste, and I was like, I want to try that. That looks delicious to me. So I was like, what else am I missing out on? When I go to the Asian market or the African market or the Latin market or whatever, what am I not noticing? What am I not picking up because I don't know what it is or I don't know how to use it, right? So that's that. The art of flavor. There's a theme here. Can you tell? And then also I want to pick up the designer's cookbook, just because, if you can't tell, I love a monochromatic look. And so I would love to cook, like, an all grain meal from start to finish, but have, like, a world of flavor, but it be on a theme. So because I also love interior design. So some of these I just want because they just pique my interest. Some of these I really want to, like, read and study. And I just want to become a student again when it comes to food and the culinary arts, right? I just feel like I haven't been a student of my craft in a while. Like, I've been a student of business and all of that, but I haven't been a student of my first love, my skill set, my craft. And so I really want to dig into that. This is a very popular one, Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. Why I'm the last person on earth to get this book, I don't know, but it's on the list. And so now I have a couple of books that are more kind of like traditional cookbooks that I want to pick up. I want to pick up Black Food because I believe this book has, like, recipes from the diaspora, which I really want to get into because I think there are a lot of African American dishes that pull from all over the diaspora, right? And so I really want to make that connection for myself, right? I want to see what's happening in St. Lucia versus Trinidad and Tobago versus what's happening in the Congo versus what's happening in Louisiana versus what's happening in Jamaica versus, I want to see, what cooking methods, what ingredients, what flavor profiles are common, what's different and why, how we adapted to different surroundings and agricultural systems and use that in some of our, like, ancestral cooking. So I'm really, really intrigued by that. I want to pick up 2 books by Claire Saffitz. just because I like her approach to pastry. I was watching her when she was on Bon Appetit's YouTube channel, and then she left that and started her own channel, and I'm subscribed to that channel. I enjoy it. And Claire is not necessarily making super complicated things. I know she's fully capable of. You can tell she's fully capable. Her cookbooks are more designed for the curious home cook, but there are some things, some flavor profiles, some approaches that she's taking in some of her desserts that I find really interesting. So I want to pick that up. So that's What's for Dessert and Dessert Person. And the last book I really want to pick up is Mooncakes and Milk Bread. And the reason why I want to pick this up is because I feel like in the past decade or so, Asian desserts have really, maybe past 15-20 years, Asian desserts have really come to the forefront in America. I mean, we were probably slow, but like I said, we have been so focused on French inspired desserts in the culinary world, or European desserts, with the occasional venture out into other cuisines and cultures, that I really wanted to get into this because some of their techniques around bread baking, different cakes, moon cakes using bean paste, boiled eggs, things like that, I find very intriguing. And I would love to incorporate some of the flavor profiles, some of the baking techniques, things like that into my own cooking and baking. So I know I kind of ran through that list fast. I'm going to have, like I said, all of the books down listed in the description box. And I'm going to be creating a storefront that as I find, new or just classic books that I want to add to my collection, you can always check that out. Let me know. Do you have any of these books? Do any of these books pique your interest? Have you stayed up on your cookbook game? Are you also wanting to get back to being a student of our art, of our craft? And let me know. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't been checking out the podcast, make sure you check that out. I'll leave all my social links down below so we can connect in between videos, and I'll see you in my next video. Peace.